Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/Malicious Compliance. In today's episode, HOA wants me to join, so I do. Just not how they expected. Muddy drill sergeant. Want me to close the bathrooms? Okay then. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. HOA wants me to join, so I do. Just not how they expected. So this story is about a property I own, but rent out. This may sound strange, but I don't think I could afford to live there these days. It's become somewhat exclusive. I guess this could also go in pro revenge. I've used dollars here, because it's what most people reading this will relate to. This doesn't take place in the US, and I've given an approximate dollar value for local currency. To answer the most commonly asked question, this is in South Africa. This is going to be very long. Background. A million years ago, my property was part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm was broken up, but before there was any development near it. The piece of land I got was near the back entrance that joined into a dirt road that ran past. The more expensive plots were near the tarred road in the front. I originally bought a large chunk of the land intending to do some farming, but that never happened. About 20 years ago, some of the owners got organized, we'll call them the organized owners, OO, and had the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to put in tarred roads, water and electricity if a certain percentage of the properties were developed. A construction company, linked to the OO, went around contacting the owners who had land but no buildings, offering to build houses for us at a very, very reasonable price, contingent on them getting a certain minimum amount of people signing up. While this was happening, one of the OO approached me and offered to buy half of my property. I agreed, and the money I got for the sale, which was about 4x what I'd paid for the entire chunk of land 10 years prior, combined with a small loan from the bank, gave me what I needed to pay for a house to be built, and it was a fairly large and nice house too. I stayed in the house for a few years, and my mom moved in with me. I had decided to subdivide the property again and build her a house next to mine, but unfortunately an undiagnosed tumor took her before the house could even be started. Well, it was diagnosed, but too late to do anything. Soon after she died, we moved out of the house and started renting it out. About a few weeks before we moved out the OO, I'd sold the land to started talking about starting an HOA. I wasn't interested, and left soon after. About 2 years later, the neighbor OO contacted me. There were two roads entering the area these days, the original tarred road that was near where the farmhouse had been and was entered from a fairly busy main road, and my dirt road back entrance, which was now a tarred entrance from a wide but not very busy municipal road. The HOA was trying to get the old farm road blocked off to improve security and decrease through traffic, and wanted the road next to my property to be the main, and only, entrance to the HOA community. And they were pressuring me to join. I said no. And I was adamant, and eventually they accepted that, but told me they wanted to have a sign near the road welcoming people to the neighborhood, and the only practical place to put it was on the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a little guard hut and have a security guard permanently monitoring who went in and came out, and they wanted to build his shed on my property. We came to an agreement whereby they would mow the lawn and pay the equivalent of about $35 per month in exchange for the land they needed. I was very happy with this arrangement, since the property was fairly large, and it didn't really cost them anything since they already had a full-time gardening service servicing the HOA. This all happened over a decade ago. They eventually got the other main road blocked off, and the HOA is paying for rent-a-cop to be permanently stationed close to my property, as well as mowing my lawn and paying me enough money for takeaways for the family each month. I'm occasionally contacted by members of the HOA to get me to sign up, but I'm really not interested. My property has been rented to the same tenant for all these years, and everything there is going well for me. Until about 3 years ago, when someone scared the crap out of my tenant's young daughter by making strange noises and shooting a gun close to her bedroom window 3 or 4 times over about a month. This scared my tenant, and I guessed it scared the HOA because they and my tenant contacted me with a proposal. I joined the HOA and they give me exclusions from the HOA rules, including exclusions from paying the monthly fees, and in addition they will build a wall around the entire HOA neighborhood, including electric fencing and security cameras. They told me they had wanted to do this for a while but were unwilling to build the wall on property that was not in the HOA. I couldn't see the downside, and so agreed. The dishonest dealings. It took a little over a year to build the wall and get everything completed, which is quite fast. And then a month to the day after everything was done, my tenant got an HOA warning about his dogs barking. He told the HOA that while the property was in the HOA, it was exempt from the rules. The HOA told him that they had canceled the exemptions, and that he had 30 days to comply. He contacted me, and I opened some mail I'd gotten from the HOA. I'd ignored it since I was supposed to be exempt from the rules and fees. Man, did I get a surprise! They had retroactively canceled the exemptions, and were claiming that I pay late fees going back over a year, that the easement agreement had been canceled, and that they were retroactively canceling it a year back because the HOA contract allowed them to use small unused portions of HOA members' land for the common good for free. That I refund them the money they had paid for the easement over that period. That I owed them money for the garden service mowing the large lawn, and that I would be fined for each infraction my tenant failed to remedy. This started an expensive process involving lawyers and the court system that ended with a judge telling me that what the HOA had done was mostly legal. They had the right to revoke the exemptions, but that they had to give me 30 days notice. As I was walking to my car, the neighbor, the one who bought half my land so many years ago, told me that I was stupid to have refused to join when the HOA started, as I could have been a founder member, whatever that means, and that next time I should be sure to understand the documents I signed before signing them. The malicious compliance. Neighbor OO was right, I should have read the contract better. Also, I was interested in what it meant to be a founding member. Spoiler, nothing, and so when I got home I grabbed the HOA contract I'd signed, as well as all the other documentation they had provided me with, and started reading. I was determined to break every rule I could find a loophole to break. I didn't get past the first page. While the street address of the property is used to identify it for all practical purposes, in the city records it has a unique property number that has to be used on legal records. When my mom moved in, I'd subdivided the remaining property but hadn't yet started building on it. And when I gave the HOA the easement all those years ago, it had been on the property I'd sliced off for my mom. And when the HOA set up the contract, they had simply used the property number from the easement. The next afternoon the neighbor OO delivered, and had me sign two documents, one telling me that my exemptions would expire in 30 days, and one letting me know that the easement would no longer be required after 30 days. I think he was being a bit malicious here, because I lived about an hour away from the property, and he drove out himself. The revenge. Exactly 30 days to the hour after the HOA had given me the 30 days notice, I knocked on the neighbor OO's door. Did I mention he was the president of the HOA, and had him signed for two documents? The first was that I planned to build a house on my HOA property, which confused him, and the second was notice that they had 30 days to remove from the property the guard shed, the parts of the electric boom that were on my property, as well as the sign. He tried to engage me but I ignored him, climbed into my car and drove off. Early the next morning I got a call from the HOA lawyer who explained to me that their junk would be staying on my property since it was in an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there, and that the land would not be unused anymore. I could hear the smirk as he told me that building a second house to be spiteful would not be accepted by the courts. I sure hope he could hear the smirk in my voice when I told him that the property in question did not have a house, and was, in fact, barely large enough for a house to be built and would not be large enough for any extraneous buildings. I then told him to go look up the property in question and call me back. I had sliced off just enough to be legal, which was just enough to build a small house. It took them just under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer told me that the terms of the easement meant that I could not cancel without their permission, so I emailed him a photo of the document they sent to me canceling the easement. That afternoon, neighbor OO invited me to lunch, his treat, to discuss the problem. I said no thanks. He extended the offer again 2 days later, and again I said no thanks. Others of the original OO contacted me to try to talk. Some sounded aggressive, some sounded sympathetic. I said no thanks to each of them. Eventually, the lawyer phoned and asked if we could come to some sort of arrangement. I asked what he had in mind, and he told me that he was prepared to discuss exclusions in exchange for access to my property. So I said no thanks, and please don't call me again. About 9 days before their 30 days was up, I got a call from a different lawyer. He said he wanted to negotiate a surrender, his words, not mine. I agreed to meet him at his office the next day. I'd already had documents drawn up, and the meeting was as simple as me giving him the documents and him reading them over. My new easement offer included everything offered by the old easement offer. I changed the line mow the lawn to get the property to HOA standards and keep it there since it was now in the HOA. Would cost them about $500 per month instead of $35. This amount would increase with inflation. The previous contract didn't include that bit. When cancelled, for whatever reason, the HOA would have to pay me a cancellation fee of around $7,500. The contract automatically terminated 30 days after. Any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property. Any complaints were levied by the HOA against the property. Any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the HOA. That lawyer who had offered to negotiate surrender would be allowed to mediate any disputes between us at HOA's expense, and that the HOA would pay all my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. I deliberately left some insane things in there so that I could appear to concede some points or be negotiated down when the HOA got indignant about the points I actually cared about. The lawyer didn't look happy. He said that my proposal sounded unfair, but that he'd have the HOA president look at them. I reminded him that in 8 days I'd be setting a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. That evening I got an irate call from the HOA president. He told me he was never going to sign the new contract. I said okay. He then told me I was charging too much per month, and that it should be at the same rate as the previous contract. I pointed out that when I signed the previous contract the area was under development, and there was at least one other road leading in and out, but that now there was only mine. And besides, mine was now developed with everything they needed. He told me that I was forcing them to sign a document they didn't want to sign. I told him that he was free to not sign it. He whined about everything he could think of, and then eventually told me I'd be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, surrender lawyer called to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I got there that afternoon, I learned that surrender lawyer was not a lawyer, but a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He laughed when I told him I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing was changed, and mumbled something that sounded like "I'm sure you would." I read the contract. Nothing had been changed. Not a single thing. And the HOA president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as witness. I looked at him and said, "Why did he sign this?" It was stupid to sign it, and the paralegal looked at me and said I started telling him that signing it would be a bad decision, but he told me I wasn't being paid to think or give legal advice, and to shut up. So I shut up. I said, "Do you understand what he's signed here?" He looks at me and nods. He said I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers look at it before giving it to you, and he told me that we had already billed enough for this, and that he'd sign it and sue me after their easement was safe. This happened about 1.5 years ago. It took 6 months for the HOA to find out how screwed they were. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained to them that there was no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would get is the easement contract voided, and they did not think that the court would side with them. The lawyers were adamant about one thing: the HOA could not live with the HOA pays my legal fees if legal action was taken against me, since it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the HOA as worded. The HOA would be said to pay for my legal fees if anyone took legal action against me. They argued that the courts would probably not enforce that, since the context of the agreement was to do with the HOA, and I told them I was prepared to find out, since the HOA would definitely be the ones taking action against me if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract that said that the neighbor HOA president would personally pay all my legal fees unless he held no position at all in the HOA, and that the HOA would pay all legal fees if the HOA took legal action against me. He resigned from the HOA at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. He didn't look pleased. It came out during the mediation. You cannot imagine how happy the lawyers were that their paralegal was mediating, that without the ability to control access to the HOA neighborhood through the security boom, partially, on my property, the HOA had become a gated community a number of years back. The HOA would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned, should have been obvious to me, that all the security cameras were wired, and all terminate in the guardhouse/guard shed. So basically, it was my way or the end of the HOA. That first mediation was really quite funny. My paralegal looked more than a little glum as we assembled, and he called everyone to order. I suspected that he had been told to work against me, so I took the initiative. I reminded everyone there that I had agreed to let paralegal mediate, but that I had agreed to no arbitration at all. If I didn't feel like the proceedings were fair, I'd leave and they could go ahead and sue. Paralegal brightened up and things actually went quite well. I'm writing this after getting home from the latest mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighborhood dogs. As in, I made it myself. I dug a hole, packed it with stone, and added a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and if I say so myself, it looked, well, terrible. The HOA called for a mediation meeting, what they do now instead of taking official action. I declined their mediation requests in the past, in which they told me, as nicely as they could, that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the HOA. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed to give to me at the next meeting. The list was extensive. It basically required the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. I asked them if there was any way to reduce costs on the work they needed to get it up to HOA standards, and they assured me there was not. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to get the property to HOA standards, which I'd highlighted, and handed it to them with the list. I told them the HOA usually preferred if these things were dealt with within 30 days. They started arguing until the mediator reminded them that they could not force me to comply without causing the easement to end. I should mention that their lawyers usually no longer attend these things. They said they would get it done. I also learned a lot about Neighbor OO today. I found out that Neighbor OO sold his property about 3 months back and is apparently leaving the country for Australia. I found out that the HOA had successfully sued him for a crapload of money they had lost to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. I also learned that he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure if I will screw with the HOA anymore. I already think I'm so close to breaking them. The only thing stopping them from canceling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. I guess a lot depends on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. Also, I do like the monthly payments, though, so I'm motivated to play nice. Neighbor OO was right, though, in the end. You really shouldn't sign documents unless you understand what you are signing. I reminded him that in 8 days I'd be setting a group of men armed with sledgehammers and anger management issues loose on whatever of theirs was still on my property. This got me. It got me right in the feels. Mine was when he told them they had to make all the fixes to the dog pool to get to the HOA standards. That bit about unless he was no longer part of the HOA, that got me right there. You took his shallow position of power and pulled it from right under him. Too bad you never found out what you did to anger him, though. If I had to guess, the guy felt slighted that OP resisted joining the HOA. Nah, OP could still friend him on FB. I would love to see OO's face if OP did that. That'd be a killer way to rub salt in the wound. LOL. This is a long story, and occasionally I had to reread a sentence. I paused my music so I could concentrate, vaguely reminding me of English reading exams in the past. Well worth the read. Excellent malicious compliance, and clever dance about of the legal system. I adore the bit where you make them needing to pay for all legal matters quite a lot. They shot themselves in the foot with a bazooka. My plan would have been an okay amount of malicious compliance. Neighbor OO deciding that he could bully me after signing was the stupidity that allowed this to go nuclear. Really, this is mostly on him. This is one of the most complex and longest ongoing malicious compliance stories I've ever read. Is there anything in your agreement about transferring the agreement to new owners if you sell? It seems like owning this property for the specific purpose of extracting money from the HOA would be a legitimate investment. The ERF property, the HOA have the easement on is really small compared to the main property, and completely separate. If I sold the main property, it wouldn't affect the smaller property. As to whether the easement would move if I sold the smaller property, I'm not sure. Property law says the easement stays in effect if I sell, but whether it would pay to me or the new owner is something I'm not sure of. The contract is with me personally, but it assumes I own the property. I also learned that he had a vendetta against me. I have no idea what I did to upset him. Okay, that was too much. I'm wheezing here, laughing face. He probably had a vendetta against OP for not joining the HOA when neighbor wanted to found it. He sounds like the sort who wanted to create a fief and was upset that it wasn't as large as he originally thought. Glorious. How does it feel being the smartest person in the mediations, haha? Not so much smarter as holding all the cards. It's actually liberating. I felt like I could afford to be nice because I had nothing to lose, no real consequences. You need to take your HOA destroying skills on the road. Hire yourself out as an HOA hitman. Muddy Drill Sergeant. First of all, I got mad respect for the uniform and all servicemen, past and present. Except for one. Here's my story. When I was 19, I did my military service as was custom for young men in my country. See, I am not American. Anyhow, I did enjoy my time in the Defense Force quite a lot. Made some new friends, learned a lot of new stuff, and I also bought me 1 year of thinking of what to do with my life. I had some plans to continue in uniform one WSY or another, but that is not really interesting in this story. What is interesting is some basic facts to keep in mind during my story, however. First of all, I did my military service 15-minute drive from home, which meant I knew all the area around the base pretty well since I had grown up in there. I am also that kind of person that will ask questions to learn more and who will always try to put in my best effort in everything I do. And also, to learn the rules. As a new recruit, there is a ton of things to learn. How to dress, how many buttons to button, and so on. Shaving of the hair is encouraged, but not mandatory. Same goes for facial hair. Personally, I enjoy having a bit of hair on top but shaved on the sides. And here my antagonist enters the story. One of the 3 drill sergeants that was set to teach us the basics of soldiering. I was quick to learn the ropes, maybe not the most fit of the recruits, but certainly not the sloppiest either. Every morning we would line up for inspection and the drill sergeants would inspect each and every one of us recruits, often finding small defects to complain about sending us away to correct. And each time it happened to me, I would always smile and say yes sir and go and correct it, knowing there was nothing to correct, it was just a way to drill us. Now, one of the sergeants, let's call him SGTB, always found something to complain about on everyone, and I think it annoyed him that I always smiled. SGTB SGTB was shorter than average and somewhat rounded, not fat, just a bit chunkier than average as well. Instead of talking loud like the others, he preferred screaming, especially in the face of people. I guess he had seen too many war movies with bad drill instructors in them. That did not go down well with us conscripts, really. We quickly lost respect for him as a person, but we did respect him for being our superior officer, or his uniform, if that makes sense. Anyhow, he did not seem to like me at all and would always mess with me, and one day I got my revenge. It was in the fall. We were aside the base training for a bigger exercise coming up. They had divided us into groups of 8 and our mission was to relocate from one location to another. We had all our personal equipment like backpack, weapon and so on, plus the group tent, stove and heavy machine gun. So we were quite heavy, equipment-wise. And I was assigned group leader this event. Good thing we were in an area I knew well, so navigating was easy since I knew all paths in the forest and so on. And SGTB was tagging along, not knowing I knew the area, but my team knew. The path we took ended up at a small swamp and would split so you could walk around the swamp on either side. I decided we should take a 5-minute rest since we were ahead of schedule anyway. SGTB did not like that, even though I think honestly he was the one who needed it the most since he was the one huffing and puffing despite he didn't carry anything except his uniform and a water bottle. I asked my team which side around the swamp they wanted to go and told them the pros and cons of each way. I don't remember which way we choose, but I remember I picked up the machine gun, 12.4 kilograms, so quite heavy. Now SGTB intervened and demanded I check the map, but I said we already decided to go round the swamp. For some reason SGTB wanted us to cross the swamp. It looked dry enough to cross, but I declined and said we'd go round. This is where he pulled rank and demanded we cross. Cue my malicious compliance. I asked him if he would take command of the group and lead us across, to which he replied, "I'll take command. Group, follow me." So I stood down and let him past me. I think he managed to take about 1.5 steps into the swamp before he had sunken down to his waist in mud. We decided not to follow him and instead we all just looked at him. After a while one of the others asked him, "Any new orders, sir?" We pulled him out of the swamp. He was furious but didn't say a word. He walked back the way we came in his wet muddy uniform. The rest of us continued around the swamp. We did not see him back in camp that day. After that incident he did not bother me anymore for the rest of my conscription time. "Any new orders, sir?" killed me. Cheeky without stepping out of line. Kudos. Succinct, dirty MC with consequences. Bonus points for military and non-US. Want me to close the bathrooms? Okay then. While I was in college, I worked as a janitor for a pretty busy cafe. It wasn't very fun, not that being a janitor would be anyway, and the boss was pretty bad at his job, but it made the money I needed. This cafe was in a pretty rural area, and we had the only public restrooms for about 3 miles. Everyone in the community knew where the other restrooms were, but it would still be an inconvenience to drive to them, even if it wouldn't take more than a few minutes. To use these restrooms you needed to buy something, but almost everyone who entered bought something, so it wasn't a huge deal. Now, since I was in college, my work hours had to be fit around my college classes. For how my boss was with everything else, he was quite understanding when it came to this, mostly because he could only find other college students to hire. With the way my schedule worked, I always had to leave at closing to get to my classes on time, so I did my cleaning during operational hours. Most of this was in the bathrooms, and I would leave it open while cleaning each stall and occasionally the floor while I closed the only bathroom for miles. Nobody complained. Nobody saw it as an issue. That is, until a cold Wednesday in January. I was about 4 months into the job, and was into the routine by now. Boss calls me into his office before I left for the day. He tells me, "Mr. Was 6th, I received a complaint about your bathroom cleaning procedures. One of our customers slipped on a puddle in the bathroom yesterday. Is she okay?" "She's okay," she braced herself against the sink. That's good. It must have been an unfortunate accident. I always put a warning sign in front of any puddles in the bathroom while I'm cleaning them. Well, clearly, it's not enough. If you're cleaning the bathrooms, keep them closed. Close them completely? And don't reopen them until you're completely done cleaning. This customer was known for being a prolific spender, and boss only saw a big pile of money going into flames if he didn't listen to her. So he did. And I complied. Close the bathrooms completely? Okay then. The next day, I enter the cafe, a few hours after opening due to classes, and start with the bathrooms. They weren't too dirty, but I thought they, well, needed a very deep clean. So deep of a clean it would take me the rest of the day to clean it up, as opposed to about an hour or two. After all, boss never said how fast I should clean them. Whenever a customer wanted to use the restroom, I would just say that I was ordered by boss to keep it closed so I can clean. And after an hour, I made a closed sign for both bathrooms with some small text on the bottom saying on orders of the boss. Needless to say, things went south. Over the day, numerous people complained to boss about the closed bathrooms. Boss said he had no choice, it was for safety. Those people, knowing full well I gave adequate signage to any slippery areas, were, understandably, very confused and very angry. Luckily, the other public bathrooms were only a short drive away, but it was still a decent inconvenience for some. A few people decided that this was the last straw in boss's incompetent management. The old owners who recently sold the place were amazing from what I heard, and were never coming back to the cafe ever again. By the end of the day, boss called me into his office. Mr. Wosixth, you can reopen the bathrooms tomorrow. While the business didn't completely crumble, boss lost some very loyal customers that day and his reputation took a tumble. I've heard a bit from the past few years, and the pandemic combined with his further incompetence meant that the cafe was shuttered. I thought it was standard practice to close the toilet when it's being cleaned, for privacy as well as safety. Most places I visit just put up a sign saying cleaning in progress and something about the cleaner may be opposite sex than that shown on the door to the restroom. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as there is a free stall where you can close the door. Yeah, exactly. His boss was giving the right advice and he purposefully spent the entire day cleaning just to spite his boss when it was completely unnecessary? It's malicious, but shitty behavior from your part. A liability suit can be more expensive than couple lost customers. I've done cleaning jobs years ago. You don't deep clean during business hours. You close the restrooms for 5 minutes, do the cleaning quickly, put on signs, and open it again. If you can't do it, you are the incompetent one, not the boss. He is saving you from a liability suit too. They accommodate your hours and you repay by opening them to a lawsuit and tanking the business. It can anything about liability stuff, but I do want to point out that if they lost loyal customers because the bathrooms were closed for one day, I have a feeling that was just the tipping point for them leaving, rather than the sole reason. Your story doesn't really leave me rooting for your side of things. Just reminds me you were a person in college who didn't really care about the safety of others. Any janitor at any business would either put their cleaning cart in the doorway or be done in 10 minutes. WTF, were you cleaning that took you all day? Agreed. Also, not to mention that closing bathrooms to clean them isn't an absurd ask. It's not like it could be a liability or anything. But they also didn't really care about helping coworkers or customers if keeping people from using the bathroom was the priority for an entire shift. Weird flex, but okay. Your lack of concern for the safety of customers is revealing. Because of the porcelain and hard floors, falling in bathrooms is quite dangerous. Locking customers out of the bathrooms for longer than necessary is also evidence of your lack of concern for customers. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.